Sound test. Okay.
Yes.
There you go.
Hello.
Yeah, we can start. So, Piet, most of what we're going to be talking about in this conversation has got to do with materials and materiality. And you famously said something when you spoke at Design Indaba. You said labor costs nothing, materials cost a fortune. And you are a huge celebrant of materials and materiality. And do you want to talk a bit more about this philosophy?
You're highlighting one of my phrases, which is in a bigger story. I realized that we were throwing away materials, not because they were not useful, but because it took too much time to actually process them into the furniture we were making or into the objects we're making. And I thought it's very strange that you throw away perfect materials because labor is too expensive. And of course, when labor becomes more expensive, materials become much earlier waste. There's a balance between waste and labor. And then I thought, if I turn this around, which is not true, but I thought I'd just do it. And I act as if, or behave as if labor costs nothing, because there's many people on the world, there are many people on the world. And material is worth a fortune because there's no material in the end. Because I also think we're over-exaggerating ourselves and we underestimate materials and we're not respecting materials enough. So I thought, let's put as much as possible hours in the production and use every tiny piece of wood. And we started piling up stools and then making tables. And even in the end, when it was finished and very rough, it was almost not usable. But then I said, okay, you just lacquer it 10 times, as long as it takes a lot of time. Just add labor as much as possible. So we had a very smooth, shiny table in the end, which was extremely expensive. And I never expected it, but this has been one of our most successful concepts for us, for sure. And then people wanted to have it. It's the opposite of what everybody does, because normally if you produce, you try to be as efficient as possible, and therefore you throw away materials. And we turned the whole story around. I think people recognize the fact that there's so much attention in it. And that's actually the biggest scarceness in this world, is that people don't put attention at all in anything. Because the game is to do it with as less time as possible. And we just turned it around and became very, very successful. And it's very much how I think about materials and about the process of making things. I've always been fascinated about the idea that you can put thousands of hours in one object without any commercial reason. And then in the end, it's only a person's life or something, you know, like collections always have that always, you know, like people who collect their whole life small things. And if you put them together, it's not the collection itself, but it is the fact that somebody brought everything together. So for me, labor is something very much related to materials. And if you have to cope with an industrial process, you have to think about it, I think.
So where would you source your materials from? I mean, did you start off mainly salvaging materials, found objects, etc., etc.?
When I got my degree, I did it with scrap wood cupboards, not because I wanted to make something from scrap wood, but I was at a lumberyard, and I walked on this lumberyard finding some old wood to repair an old thing. And then I saw the wood and I thought it was more beautiful than new wood, because new doesn't reflect any story, doesn't tell anything. And there was like a whole history in piles of wood. So I was inspired by the quality of it, not by the lack of quality. And I just made as pragmatic as possible cupboards with old materials. I still look around and see what's around me, what's available, and the materials which are available, and also the techniques and crafts. I use that. I'm not thinking about something which is not available. So I never make something from a material which is not at the place of the suppliers nearby. And I think this is one of the major themes in the world, is that designers and actually entrepreneurs, everybody, because of modern logistics, thinks that everything is possible. So it doesn't matter if you use a marble from Egypt because it's available. But if you calculate it, it's not really available. It costs too much money. In the end, making products or designing with what's around you, like a farmer's logic approach. It's much more beneficial for the environment than using an environmental material coming from the other side of the world. Most of my ideas are, in the end, little drawings which take like 1 minute. And then the material, the technique and the craft and everything is in this small drawing. Because if you don't do that, it takes too much energy to actually process a material.
Well, the time and energy you put in everything you make, I mean, do you almost conceive of your products as being like heirloom furniture?
I'm often surprised about with what kind of products people come back to me and say, well, this is broke, and then it's like 15 or 20 years old. Recently, I was in my home city where I was born with the best friend of my mother. And I forgot that I made for her husband a whole series of furniture. So like a table with chairs and a coffee table. And everything was still functioning. And actually, there was my first commission. And I think it's 30 years ago. There was only one arm which was broke. So I took it with me, the chair, and I'm going to repair it. Or it's repaired already. And I bring it back. Since 1990 until now, we have a whole series of products which called the 100% series, trying to avoid waste. And we recently made a round table from a square piece of metal. And there's like less than 1% waste. And we have the 99.13% cupboard, which has a 0.87 waste, which I love. So you use everything. Throwing away also costs a lot of energy. Eh? So if you don't throw away anything, it's very, very efficient. For me, the biggest challenge is actually the production, because it's always giving a headache. It's very difficult to motivate every single person into the right level. So that part of the job is taking always a lot of energy. And what I hope to realize here is to create a hub or a space where people come and experience the total story of design. So it's not only the product which comes out, but it's also the way it's manufactured, by whom it's manufactured, the material where it's made from, the world where it comes from. I think that's a very important thing. It's not only the way it's made, it's also where it's created.
You're an inspiration, Piet. Thanks so very much. It was lovely talking to you. If you could just tail off by giving us a sneak preview on what you're working on right now.
So we're working on the hotel. We collaborate, we have a gallery, so we collaborate with a lot of artists. We change every room with pieces of antique, with art, with all kind of things. We also make, hopefully for the Dutch Design Week, a table, a knockdown table, quite efficient from materials, and a kitchen and lamps we made from old glass from the Philips Laboratoria, which are closed down here. And so there will be a very nice collection. And this year it will be more focused on aluminium than ever, which was actually the starting point. So in 1993, I made the first aluminium series, which we also sold to the Museum of Modern Art in New York, a lot of it. And it's still a very beautiful series. And I always thought this would be my retirement money, but until now it's not discovered. But perhaps with this effort we will add something to it. It will be a very nice presentation.